Okay, let's get started. Welcome to this third Impact Masterclass, which is sponsored by the Royal Society of Chemistry. My name is Melinda Kenaway, and I'm your tutor for this short course. It's designed to help you disseminate your research to improve its reach and visibility, and through that, its potential for impact. Now, this is an outline of what we expect to cover today. In the opening section, we're going to review, first of all, why proactive dissemination is becoming more important. And by proactive, I mean additional activities aside from publication that you might undertake to ensure your work gets found, read, and applied. After that, I'm going to provide a brief overview of copyright issues relating to online sharing of research publications in particular, and cover some of the publisher-led initiatives designed to support copyright compliant sharing. Having looked at why taking a more active role in disseminating your research is becoming more important, we will then examine some of the best ways of improving the visibility of your work through specialist academic tools and platforms. And finally, we will look at how social media can help you broaden your reach, particularly to audiences outside of academia. So our intention is that by the end of this short course, which should last about half an hour, you will understand the difference between active and passive dissemination, be compliant with copyright when sharing your research publications online, know how to make effective use of the best platforms for reaching academic audiences, and have a good understanding of the social media channels available to you to help you communicate about your research and broaden your reach. Do note that there is a handouts tab on the webinar software where you can see a workbook that you can download, which has lots of notes from the session today, and also some exercises if you want to dig into some of the topics in a little bit more detail. So let's start first of all with the first topic. What is effective dissemination and why does it matter? And this is a really important topic. Until quite recently, dissemination was considered done once you'd published your results. You'd won your grant, conducted your research, and the final point in the process was publishing your findings in a printed journal or book, for example. Of course, then the world moved online, and much the same material was made available online by publishers, with, of course, the many benefits this offers in terms of ease of search and discovery and linking to related resources and so on. And publishers have invested significantly in online platforms to assist with article dissemination. But despite huge and ongoing technological advances, the essential components of research dissemination remain much the same as they were back in the mid-17th century. Articles, short reports, essays and letters, generally for consumption by a relatively limited specialist audience. And one of the challenges here, which I think is expressed nicely in this question and answer posed on the Quora website, is that academic articles serve a lot of purposes for validation, for recognition, distribution, reward, archiving. And the research articles in particular are generally written for other researchers, and in particular those who will review your work, because after all, they're the gatekeepers between you and publication. But if having impact is your goal, then your work needs to reach a much broader audience, well beyond these niche audiences. And publishers have made great strides forward in expanding the functionality and distribution of research articles, but improving research dissemination more broadly requires different activities and approaches beyond publication, some of which we're going to explore today. In particular, when we talk about effective dissemination, this requires tailoring of information for the needs of different audiences. This excerpt from an article published in Implementation Science in 2010, I think, summarizes this well. They define dissemination as a planned process that involves consideration of target audiences and the settings in which research findings are to be received and, where appropriate, communicating and interacting with wider policy and health service audiences in ways that will facilitate research uptake in decision-making processes and practice. You can see how much broader this is than publication alone. And much of the research and thinking that has gone into understanding how research impact is achieved consistently emphasizes the need to engage research users, policymakers, educators, industry, the media, and public at a much earlier stage in a research project than the publication stage. And the information needs of these audiences are substantially different to an academic audience. And as you probably will be aware, impact is fast becoming a very high priority for research funders and institutions. So this is going to put pressure on researchers to develop dissemination and engagement skills, particularly related to communicating effectively outside of academia. And this is what we might call the difference between passive and active dissemination. You can publish your results in journals and books. You can have a profile of your work on ResearchGate or on your university website. You are making information about your research available. But effective dissemination is a step beyond this. It's where you work more deliberately to make your research stand out, to be comprehensible and discoverable and engage the attention of a much wider range of audiences, and particularly those who might be likely to use your research or put it into practice. I've spoken with researchers who are concerned about being a proactive communicator and concerned that this could be seen as a negative, that researchers who do this kind of outreach are seen as self-promoters and that the work should stand on its own merits. But today's world is overloaded with information. We take research articles, for example. There are some 50 million now available online, growing by 2 million every year. And yet people typically never look much further than the first page of a Google search, and they will typically enter one search term, maybe a short phrase. So consider how many people who might have an interest in your research are never going to find it unless you take more direct action to help them do so and to understand it. So becoming a proactive communicator is likely to be an ever more important part of ensuring that your research is as widely read and as useful as possible. And finally, of course, you're not the only stakeholder with an interest in your work being more widely disseminated, because increasingly your funder and institution will be looking for evidence of skills and achievements here as they decide who to fund and promote. You may already find yourself being asked to provide evidence of your impact and outreach, and certainly many funders, and here's an example from Horizon 2020, require dissemination and exploitation plans and details of the impacts that your work is going to create. So it's clear that funders are looking for broader and much more active communications too. And a lot of this requirement specifically excludes publication and academic conferences. So it's clear to see how important funders are beginning to see that this broader outreach is required. To give you an idea of how important this is becoming, at Kudos we undertook a survey recently and had over 9,000 researchers responding. And this is one of the questions that we found particularly interesting. We asked whether their current funders required any of the following, and this covered things like open access, sharing data, engaging stakeholders. And you can see that top of the list, 40% of researchers said their funders required a dissemination and impact plan as part of the grant submission. And this was closely followed by requirements also to explain how you will assist knowledge exchange and reach a wide range of audiences. And these things are ahead of other topics such as open access and data sharing, which get quite a lot of attention. And I would anticipate this trend continuing steeply upwards as competition for audience attention and funding continues to increase. And perhaps this is why you chose to join this webinar. And we certainly aim to help you take those first steps towards improving your dissemination skills. But before we get into the detail of the techniques and channels available to you, I wanted to say just a few quick words about copyright, because many of the researchers I have talked with are uncertain about what they can and can't do when it comes to sharing their work online. And this particularly relates to uploading articles, for example, to scholarly collaboration networks. By that I mean ResearchGate, academia, the SSRN, and others. So academic profile networking sites that might use. And many of them actively encourage researchers to upload their articles to your profile page, which of course is a way of disseminating your work to an academic audience. And we'll talk more about those services shortly and how to make the most of them. But I wanted to highlight that it's good to consider copyright implications, as some of these sites have a disclaimer that puts the legal onus on the author, that's you, to ensure that you have permission from the publisher to share your article in this way. As it happens, most researchers do want to respect publisher copyright. In another survey that we ran in 2017, 83% of researchers agreed or strongly agreed that copyright should be respected. But they also said that they find publisher copyright hard to navigate. So 21% of researchers agreed or strongly agreed that they didn't realise publisher or journal policies might apply when they're sharing their own work. 37% agreed or strongly agreed that they don't have time or it's too complicated to check publisher copyright. And finally, 60% agreed or strongly agreed that they should be entitled to upload their work to scholarly collaboration networks, regardless of copyright or sharing policies. So it appears that researchers value copyright, but they also value convenience. They feel under pressure to make their work more visible, and scholarly collaboration networks provide a convenient way to do this. As it happens, most publishers want researchers to be able to share content easily and legally. And of course, if you publish your article under an open access model, this usually means you're free to share and upload this however and wherever you like under a Creative Commons license. Otherwise, you may need to check the copyright with the publisher directly or using a tool. And this is a really useful site called How Can I Share It? So you can enter your DOI and check immediately copyright restrictions or not around your specific articles. And on this same site, you'll also find information on specific publisher policies. And there's also a set of principles for fair sharing that many publishers have signed up to. You may also find that your publisher provides you with a link to a read-only version of your article, which you can freely share as long as this is for non-commercial personal use by the recipient. So there's lots of help and support and guidance around what you can do specifically with published online articles. If you happen to be a Kudos user, you may find your publisher supports a feature that enables you to create a shareable PDF for your articles. This is like a summary or brochure of your article. It contains the main bibliographic data, a summary of what the article is about and why it's important, together with personal perspectives from co-authors and links to related resources. Importantly, it includes too a link directly to your article on the publisher website. This PDF can be created for any of your articles and it's totally compliant with publisher copyright. So you can share it without any complex checks. And if your publisher supports that feature, you'll find it available if you register for a free account on Kudos. Having looked at why active dissemination is becoming more important, now I'd like to focus on best practice. And this is a nice summary of 10 ways to improve your dissemination. Number 1 is expand your co-authorship base and include key stakeholders early in the research process. A wider group of co-authors not only brings additional expertise and ideas to the paper, they can also help disseminate research findings. And if you want to impact changes in policy or practice, then engage those stakeholders early on. preferably right from the conception of the research question, through the conduct of the study and to eventual publication. This early involvement fosters a sense of ownership and responsibility, which is key to bringing about any change in policy or practice. Tip number 2 is select your title and keywords wisely. So title and keywords used for your publications have the potential to significantly impact the chances of your work getting found, read and cited. Journals, search engines and abstracting and indexing services classify papers using keywords. So an accurate list of keywords will help ensure correct indexing and showcase your research to interested groups. And it's best to select keywords from a list of key terms or phrases that are used repeatedly in the text of your article and preferably not repeated in the title or abstract. You should also think about the title of your articles. This should be clear, simple and memorable if possible, and not too long. Some studies have actually shown a correlation between short titles and higher citations. And this isn't surprising, really, when you think about how much sifting through information your audience has to do. A simple title, even if the article itself is highly technical, is more likely to get their attention, and they are then more likely to read and cite it, potentially. Tip number 3 is consider publishing in an open access journal or a subscription journal with an open access option. This means your article is freely available to the broadest possible audience. You can also upload a copy of your article to sites like ResearchGate and academia.edu or your institution's repository, obviously subject to publisher copyright, as we discussed earlier. However, bear in mind that these services are oriented primarily towards academic audiences. Which brings us on to point 4, effective use of social media such as Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and so on. And social media is a great way of reaching a much broader audience, both within and outside of academia. The evidence isn't entirely clear yet, but some studies have shown a correlation between social media mentions, such as posts, tweets, and blogs, with citation counts. And I'm going to cover using social media in more detail shortly. Points number 5 and 6, create and share podcasts and share research outputs other than manuscripts. These points both cover a similar area, which is consider other forms of outputs that you might have or could create other than your publications to help disseminate information about your research, particularly to help explain it in ways that are relevant for the different audiences that we've been talking about. You might create a project website which explains your work in broader and more accessible terms. And you can link to that podcasts, videos, presentations, figures and data. And maybe host some of those outputs on platforms like SlideShare, Data Triad, Instagram and Figshare. Actively sharing information across all those sites can hugely broaden your reach and visibility. And I'm going to show you a case study in a moment of somebody using a lot of these channels very effectively. Point number 7 is dissemination through personal blogs, such as Tumblr, WordPress, research blogging. This can be a really powerful way to keep people updated on your research throughout a project, sharing news and updates sometimes over several years. As with many social media channels, many of the blogging platforms offer you the opportunity to build a network and more actively engage with your readers, which is key to impact. Point number 8 is get a unique author identifier from ORCID. ORCID IDs are a permanent identifier for researchers. They protect your unique scholarly identity and help you keep your publication record updated with very little effort, and it's free to register. So this ensures that your publication record is as complete as possible, which assists with the visibility of your research. And after you've created an ORCID account, you can link it to your Google Scholar and LinkedIn profiles, your personal website, and any other websites where you have a profile. Point number 9 is draft policy briefs and evidence summaries in lay language and communicate strategically with policymakers and key stakeholders. So a lay language policy brief is a short, to the point, jargon-free document written for non-specialists, especially policymakers who can influence policy. And it presents research findings and evidence to key stakeholders, highlighting the relevance of the specific research to policy and offering recommendations for change. This is an effective way of bringing important research to the attention of audiences outside of academia, as they can be read in a short amount of time. Number 10 is investigate some of the other tools that are available specifically to help you with dissemination, such as Kudos, which we've already mentioned, Impact Story, which is now called Our Research, Altmetric, Google Scholar, some of these tools, and I'll outline a few more of those in a moment. So I hope this has inspired some general ideas for how you can improve your dissemination. But as many of you may not be that familiar with some of these services, I just want to spend this final section listing in more detail what they are, so you can find out a little bit more about those that you think are most relevant for your research. So let's start first of all with academic tools and platforms, and then we'll look more generally at social media. So in this survey that we ran at Kudos back in 2017, we asked researchers how they share information about their research aside from publication. So this will give you a good idea of what your peers are doing and how they're communicating about their work. And as you can see from their responses, traditional academic activities predominate. We've got conferences, conversations with colleagues, using institutional websites and repositories, emails, and so on. But note how mainstream the academic networks have now become. Second point here, close to 80% of people responding were using these tools. So this is Mendeley, ResearchGate, Academia, EDU, and so on. Back in 2017, and this may have changed even now, social media networks were being used by something like 43% of respondents. I suspect that's even higher now. Generally, we're seeing this grow all the time. Similarly, project and personal websites were used by less than a quarter of respondents, but again, we're seeing a lot of people spending more time creating these sites now as a means for communicating about their work. And it's good that we are beginning to see more development and use of some of these broader channels, because otherwise this is a huge lost opportunity for improving the reach and visibility of research. And these new channels and formats offer some really exciting opportunities for interpreting research for different audiences, and for you to engage more directly with people interested in your projects. So I've just put together here a quick summary of some of the main academic tools and platforms, and these are all listed in the workbook that you can find under the Handouts tab on the webinar software. And you'll see that they group into a number of different types of services, from profiling, some CV network sites, as already mentioned, ResearchGate, Academia, Mendeley, Google Scholar, through to blogging tools like Research Blog, specific dissemination tools like Kudos, and online repositories such as Figshare and Dryad, Mericier, specifically for academic posters, CodeOcean for computational code and data. And then there are tools you can use for tracking online attention in your work. So using these channels and creating outputs to suit them is a fantastic way of increasing your digital footprint of your work. Let's just move on and talk about general social media for a moment before we look more specifically at a case study. There are a huge number of tools available, some more appropriate than others, and growing and changing all the time, of course. And my sort of best advice for these platforms is try them and find what works for you. Most of them have tracking in terms of views of your work, followers, bookmarks, engagement. And this is the sort of activity that's best for you to experiment with and then see the results that you get, and spend your time on those channels and activities where you're getting most engagement and interest. But the main ones certainly that we know are being used by academics are Medium, a fantastic general blogging tool. Twitter, probably the most widely used social media channel for academic purposes. I use it a lot, particularly at conferences. Fantastic for growing your network. Facebook, surprisingly, often people think of it as a personal tool, but it's also used by many people in a professional manner as well. LinkedIn, most of you will be familiar with as a professional sort of CV networking site. WordPress has a lot of functionality, can be a little bit complicated, but is a good tool for creating a basic project website. And if you are using quite a lot of profile sites, you might like the About Me tool, where you can aggregate all those together and have one kind of super profile for all your other profiles and channels. Things like videos and images are getting a lot of attention in research communications industry as a way of communicating what you do in a more engaging manner. And there are lots of places to host those videos and images, from YouTube to Vimeo through to Flickr, Pinterest, Instagram. And of course, if you're doing presentations at conferences, you can have a channel on SlideShare and really extend your audience through those kinds of channels. So I just wanted to finish with a very quick case study, and the links for everything I'm about to show you are all in the workbook again, so you can explore it at your leisure. But to see an example of a researcher really using these tools to some of their full capabilities, I wanted to show you some of the social media activities for Professor Andy Meyer, who's the chair in Science, Communication and Future Media at the University of Salford. So, of course, he has an advantage in that this is also his research area. He's very active. He's also an advisor with a whole bunch of committees and an advisor to Kudos too, as it happens. So he has a profile across a range of channels, and I'm just going to jump across and show you some of his activities. So first of all, here is his profile on ResearchGate, and you can see that he has a number of relationships in terms of his network. He has a project, he's featuring his research publications here, and obviously able to track and collect data about interest in his publications and projects through that platform. But he also has a profile on academia.edu and can look at kind of the comparative types of audiences and interest in his work that helps generate too. So he has his books, his papers, his work available here. And although in some ways this is a fairly passive way of presenting your work, there is the opportunity to engage and build your network through those platforms too. Obviously, that's down to you to take the initiative on doing that. And he also has a profile on Google Scholar and can track his citations and get found through that page. And he has a profile on LinkedIn. And here you can see him using the site more to showcase his skills than his outputs. And again, extend his network outside of academia, which is much easier to do through LinkedIn than just within academia, which is where ResearchGate and academia are more useful. And here we see another side of Andy's personality. And I talked about if you have multiple profiles, you can bring them together into one sort of super profile And that's what Andy has done here with the About Me site. There's lots of other tools. Basic listing is free. There's lots of other tools you can buy to help you sort of build your network through this site. But here he links up his channels and some of his other identities into one page. And beyond profiling, Andy also has produced lots of different kinds of publications, and he uses several tools for both creating and hosting those. So one of those is called Issue, and he has a profile here. He's hosting his CV, and he's also created a range of publications outside of his formal research publications that talk through topics of interest to him and to his followers. And he uses Scribed, another very similar platform, in much the same way, creating, uploading, profiling his publications. And again, when people are searching on search terms to do with his areas of research, there are now multiple places potentially that information can be found that can lead back to publications. And he's also very active on Twitter. As you can see here, he has over 9,000 followers, so a huge network, and regularly posting about his work, his interests, things that interest him. And he has his own YouTube channel where he links both videos that are of interest to him and his research area, and he also creates his own videos, commentary on events that he's attending. So fantastic profile for him and his work. He uses Flickr in a similar way. This is an image site, and he's posting information from workshops here that he's attended and led to do with his research. And similarly with Pinterest, he has a number of boards. What's often interesting about social media is that you get this crossover between professional and personal activities. So he has everything from recipes through to radical art. And that sometimes is a crossover that people can feel uncomfortable with. You have to make your own judgment about what's useful for you. But you can certainly choose to focus primarily on your research and use this as a professional communication tool for those purposes. So if you want to find out more about Andy and that particular case study, then in the workbook I put a link to this article in the Times Higher Education, where he outlines some of those tools in more detail and why he's using them. So just to summarize, effective dissemination is a planned process. Consider engaging target audiences early in your research process. Adapt your communications to the needs and technical capabilities of different audiences, and consider how other outputs aside from your publications can help you broaden your reach. Also consider additional materials that you might produce to help explain your work and capture your audience's attention, such as infographics, videos, policy briefs, blogs, and so on. Maintain an active profile on scholarly networks. Build your profile and network across key social media channels. And in particular, look for and develop opportunities for engagement, as that is so strongly linked to subsequent impact. Use tools like Kudos, Altmetric, Google Scholars, and others to help you plan, log, and track your results. And focus your time on activities that get you the best results. So that requires a little bit of monitoring of some of the results you're getting from those different activities. I mentioned earlier that Kudos is a dissemination specialist tool for researchers. It's free for publication dissemination. If we're interested in learning a bit more, we have also just launched a new product called Kudos Pro, which enables research groups to collaboratively plan their communications and track the resulting interest and impact that comes from that. And you can find more information here, and that's also in your workbook. And also just a reminder that this masterclass is one of 4, and this is the 3rd of that series of 4, and our final masterclass, again, thanks to the Royal Society of Chemistry for sponsoring this, will be on engaging broad audiences outside of academia for real-world impact. So we're going to look specifically at how to write and communicate with policymakers, industry, media, and public. So hopefully you will want to join us for that masterclass that will be in December, and we'll be circulating information about that shortly. So thank you once again for your attention. I hope you found that useful. Do fill out our survey when this webinar closes, but I do have time for some quick questions if anybody would like to ask anything. I've had one question in about which is the best platform of the academic channels for sharing information about research articles. And again, this is very much a thing that you need to test for yourselves. So it's worth having a profile and running an experiment across the main networking sites and seeing for yourself the kind of audiences that you attract. Looking at Andy's profile on academia versus ResearchGate, you may have noticed that he has a lot more followers on academia than he does on ResearchGate. But academia is a much more general platform, so it has a much larger audience, postgrads and students, as opposed to ResearchGate, which is more focused on probably your peers. Again, so try for yourself, track the results, have an awareness of the different audiences of those platforms that then helps you understand, are you reaching the right people? So there's a question here about gold open access. I've got, I think this is showing on the slide for chemical science from Royal Society of Chemistry, which we will follow up specifically with some more information about that. But basically it means that if you publish in that journal, you can disseminate the work however, wherever you want without restriction. I've had another note too about how you can access some of the earlier webinars that we've run. These are available on the Royal Society of Chemistry website, but we will circulate a link just so that you've got that to refer to. I think that's the main questions. Thank you very much, and I'll look forward to seeing you on our next webinar in December.